Julie Dart, 1991, Leeds. Why did the ransom letters arrive after she was already dead? Every city carries stories that disappear into its streets. Most begin with something ordinary, a familiar road, a short conversation, a person expected home later that night. Nothing announces the moment when routine becomes danger. No warning separates an uneventful evening from the last hours of a life. In Leeds, during the summer of 1991, one young woman crossed that invisible line. Her name was Julie Dart. She was 18 years old, and within days of her disappearance, messages written in her own hand would create the hope that she could still be brought home. The truth behind those messages was far darker. Julie came from Leeds in West Yorkshire. Public records reveal only limited details about her life before the crime, a restraint that matters because later coverage often reduced her identity to the circumstances in which her killer found her. Contemporary newspapers described Julie as a sex worker. She was also a daughter, an niece, and a young woman barely into adulthood. Her mother, Lynn Dart, would later tell a courtroom that Julie suffered from asthma and struggled with confined spaces. Those personal details would take on a terrifying meaning once police learned where she had been held. The man responsible was Michael Sams, a middle-aged heating engineer living in Sutton-on-Trent, Nottinghamshire. He had served in the Merchant Navy, worked as a lift engineer, and later operated his own business. He had also spent time in prison for offenses involving car theft and insurance fraud. During an earlier period of incarceration, he lost a leg following cancer treatment. None of this marked him publicly as the architect of an elaborate kidnapping scheme. To those who knew him only casually, he could appear practical, technically capable, and unremarkable. Beneath that surface, he was developing plans that relied on distance, machinery, false identities, and psychological control. Sams had a deep interest in railways. He recorded routes, stations, bridges, and telephone locations with obsessive attention. That knowledge would later become central to his ransom instructions. He understood how a person could be moved between counties, how messages could be sent from different places, and how railway landmarks could confuse anyone trying to follow him. His planning did not begin after Julie entered his vehicle. Evidence presented at trial showed that he had already developed kidnapping and extortion plans before her abduction. On July 9, 1991, Julie was in the Chapeltown area of Leeds. Some later accounts give July 10th as the date she disappeared, but contemporary court reporting supports July 9th as the date of the abduction. The precise words exchanged between Julie and Sams were never reliably recorded. Any detailed conversation presented as fact would be reconstruction. What can be established is that Sams abducted her and drove her away from Leeds, toward his workshop near Newark. The distance itself served him. Julie vanished in one police area, was taken to another, and would later be found in a third. At a time before modern digital tracking, that separation complicated the search. There were no phone location records placing her along the route, and no network of automatic license plate cameras tracing every mile. By moving her across regional boundaries, Sams created confusion before police even knew his name. The workshop near Newark had been prepared for captivity. Inside was a cramped wooden compartment described in court as coffin-like. Sams used the building as a controlled environment where a victim could be restrained and hidden. Julie's mother later testified that her daughter had asthma and found confined spaces difficult. The court would hear that witnesses nearby recalled hearing a woman screaming around the period Julie was held there. At the time, those sounds had no known connection to a missing teenager in Leeds. Only later would their significance become clear. Sams forced Julie to write messages. One was intended for her boyfriend, while other communications formed part of a wider ransom effort directed towards her family and the police. The demand was £140,000. A handwritten message from the victim could serve as apparent proof that she was alive, and that appearance gave the kidnapper leverage. Julie's handwriting offered hope, but the words were produced under coercion. Her family could not know whether she had written them minutes earlier, days earlier, or under what threat. According to Sams's post-conviction confession, Julie was killed soon after the abduction on July 10th. That date comes from his later account rather than an independently documented eyewitness timeline, so it must be treated with care. Medical evidence established that Julie suffered blunt force trauma and was strangled. Sams then left her body in a field near Grantham in Lincolnshire. Public reports differ over the precise nearby place name, so the most reliable description remains a field near Grantham. The discovery transformed the case. The ransom communications suggested that money might secure Julie's release, but the physical evidence showed that no rescue was possible. The person sending the demands had used the appearance of Julie's continued survival after killing her. The investigation was no longer centered on recovering a hostage. Police were now searching for a murderer who had designed the kidnapping as part of a larger extortion plan. Sams continued using threats and messages as tools of pressure. Prosecutors later described attempts to extort money from the police and British Rail, along with warnings that further women or businesses could be targeted. His railway knowledge shaped the instructions. Telephone boxes, stations, bridges, and abandoned lines became pieces of a system intended to exhaust investigators and keep the offender at a distance. Sams appeared to believe that the complexity of his routes made him invisible. In reality, each repeated habit was creating a signature. Investigators examined the ransom documents closely. Spelling patterns, typing habits, fibers beneath adhesive tape, and postmarks became part of the evidential picture. Deleted material recovered from Sams's word processing equipment later revealed fragments of planned ransom trails. Railway references appeared again and again. What may have seemed like random instructions gradually formed a recognizable method. The workshop also held physical evidence. Blood found on a curtain was reported as consistent with Julie's blood group. Fibers connected to material used around her body were linked to fibers from the workshop area. Witnesses described screams near the building. No single item told the entire story, but together they placed Julie's captivity within a location controlled by Sams. At that stage, police still had to identify him. The evidence existed without a name attached to it. Sams had avoided immediate detection by separating the place of abduction, the place of captivity, and the place where Julie was found. Months passed. Then, in January of 1992, he selected another victim. That second kidnapping would expose the structure of the first. Stephanie Slater was 25 years old and worked as an estate agent in the Birmingham area. On January 22nd, she attended what appeared to be a routine house viewing in Great Barr. The supposed buyer was Michael Sams using a false identity. This detail is often mistakenly attached to Julie's case. Julie was not an estate agent and did not disappear while attending a professional appointment. Stephanie did. Sams abducted Stephanie during the viewing and transported her to the workshop near Newark. There she was restrained and confined in the cramped wooden compartment. She later testified about the conditions inside and about her efforts to survive. Rather than provoking her captor, Stephanie tried to speak with him and create a human connection. She understood that survival might depend on making herself more difficult for him to kill. Her strategy did not remove the danger, but it gave her something to do within a situation where almost every choice had been taken away. Sams demanded £175,000 from the estate agency. Stephanie's manager, Kevin Watts, became the ransom courier. The delivery instructions led through a confusing sequence involving telephone calls, poor visibility, railway locations, and a bridge above a disused line. Watts later described his fear as he followed the route with the money. Sams had designed the exchange so he could collect the ransom while remaining hidden from police surveillance. After 8 days of captivity, Stephanie was released alive. Her survival changed the investigation. Police now had a witness who could describe the workshop, the confinement space, the offender's behavior, and the mechanics of the abduction. Details from her account echoed evidence in Julie's case: the same type of location, the same dependence on carefully managed communications, the same railway fixation, and the same effort to control every movement pointed toward one offender. The link did not rest on atmosphere or coincidence. It rested on a repeated operational design. Julie had been abducted from Leeds and forced to write messages connected to a ransom demand. Stephanie had been abducted from a house viewing and held while Sams arranged a larger payment. The outcomes were different, but the planning behind the crimes revealed the same mind. Police now possessed recordings of the kidnapper's voice. On February 20, 1992, the BBC program Crime Watch broadcast audio connected to the case. Viewers across Britain heard the man investigators were trying to identify. Among them was Susan Oak, Sam's former wife. She recognized the voice. Reports also state that one of his sons recognized it, though Susan's identification became the central public account of the breakthrough. A voice can be disguised, but familiar rhythms are difficult to erase. Pronunciation, pacing, pauses, and tone may remain recognizable to someone who has heard them for years. Susan contacted the police. The next day, Sams was arrested. The breakthrough did not come from one of the complicated railway traps he had constructed. It came because a person from his past heard him speak. Once investigators had a suspect, the separate strands began to converge. Stephanie's testimony could be compared with the workshop. The ransom documents could be compared with Sam's equipment and records. The railway instructions could be examined alongside his personal knowledge and notes. The forensic evidence connected the location to Julie. What had once looked like an offender operating across scattered places now narrowed to one man with access to all of them. Sams admitted his role in Stephanie Slater's abduction and the ransom demand connected to her employer. He continued to deny murdering Julie. During the trial at Nottingham Crown Court in 1993, he claimed that an unnamed friend had copied his kidnapping plans and was responsible for Julie's death. The explanation required the jury to accept that another person had adopted Sam's methods, operated through circumstances linked to his premises, and left behind evidence pointing back to him. No convincing identity for this supposed friend emerged. The trial lasted 22 days. Julie's mother gave evidence. Witnesses described screams near the workshop. Stephanie recounted her captivity. Kevin Watts described the ransom delivery. Forensic specialists presented the blood and fiber findings. Investigators explained the ransom correspondence, railway references, typing patterns, and deleted computer material. The case did not depend on one dramatic clue. It depended on multiple forms of evidence reinforcing one another. On July 8, 1993, the jury convicted Michael Sams of Julie Dart's kidnapping and murder, along with extortion offenses. He received 4 life sentences and additional 10-year terms for separate blackmail attempts. The judge described him as an extremely dangerous and evil man. In the courtroom, the verdict brought tears and visible relief. For Julie's family, it ended the legal claim that her killer remained unknown, but it did not immediately produce an honest account from the man responsible. On July 12th, 4 calendar days after the verdict, Sams asked to speak with Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor at Full Sutton Prison. He confessed to abducting and killing Julie and admitted responsibility for offenses connected to British Rail. The timing mattered. He had denied the murder throughout the trial and blamed an unnamed accomplice. Only after the jury rejected that story did he admit what the evidence had already established. Sams did not provide a verifiable public explanation for why he waited after conviction to confess. Any claim about his private motive would be speculation. What remains on record is the sequence: denial, conviction, then admission. The confession added detail, but it did not create the case against him. The jury had already reached its decision without it. His violence did not end with imprisonment. In 1995, Sams attacked a probation officer inside Wakefield Prison. He later received an additional sentence for that assault. Over the years, his name returned to public attention through prison disputes and parole reviews. On April 3, 2023, a parole panel refused his release and declined to recommend transfer to open conditions. Another review was reported in 2024, though a final publicly verified outcome from that later process was not established in the sources used for this account. Stephanie Slater lived for another 25 years after her kidnapping. She later contributed to public understanding of survival, captivity, and trauma. She died from cancer in 2017 at the age of 50. Her testimony had helped reveal the methods of the man who killed Julie, but Stephanie's life should not be reduced to the crime she survived. Her response under extreme pressure showed intelligence, adaptability, and courage without turning survival into a simple formula. For Julie's family, no verdict could restore what was taken. Her uncle, Gary Adkin, later spoke publicly about the effect of the murder and the distress caused whenever Sams sought parole. Julie's mother had been forced to endure ransom messages, the discovery of her daughter's body, a long investigation, a trial, and the killer's denial. Decades later, the legal process could still return the family to the same events. The case is often remembered through Michael Sams's planning, his railway obsession, and the coffin-like cell. Those details explain how the crimes were committed, but they should not displace the people at the center. Julie was 18. Public knowledge of her life remains painfully limited, while the record of her killer is extensive. That imbalance is common in true crime. Offenders create evidence, trials, files, and headlines. Victims leave behind lives that may never receive the same documentation. Julie's murder was solved because several independent paths finally met. Physical traces linked her to the workshop. Ransom documents revealed recurring habits. Stephanie survived and described the place where she had been held. Crime Watch carried the offender's voice into millions of homes. Susan Oak recognized it and acted. Each contribution closed part of the distance Sams had created between himself and his crimes. He had relied on separation, one city for the abduction, another for the captivity, another for the body, and different routes for every message. He had relied on confusion, believing that enough moving parts would prevent investigators from seeing the whole. The opposite happened. His methods repeated, his language repeated, his railway references repeated. His own structure became the map that led back to him. Julie Dart's case does not end with an unanswered mystery. Her killer was identified, tried, convicted, and later confessed. What remains unresolved belongs to a different kind of question. We cannot know every moment Julie experienced inside that workshop. We cannot know what she thought when she was forced to write messages to the people waiting for her. We cannot recover the future she lost at 18. What survives is the record of what was done to her, the evidence that exposed the offender, and the refusal of her family to let her become a footnote in the story of Michael Sams. He tried to control the account through forced letters, false trails, courtroom denial, and a confession delivered only after conviction. He failed. The final record does not belong to him alone. It belongs to Julie, to those who searched for her, to the woman who survived the same captor, and to the people who recognized the truth when they heard his voice.